You are looking at the most expensive weapons system in the history of mankind. This is the USS Gerald R. Ford. It is a nuclear-powered fortress made of 100,000 tons of American steel. It stands 20 stories tall, carries 75 aircraft, and cost the taxpayers $13 billion to build. That is more than the annual GDP of many small nations. It is designed to survive torpedoes, cruise missiles, and even the electromagnetic shockwave of a nuclear bomb. But right now, this $13 billion asset is facing an enemy that cannot be sanctioned, bombed, or intimidated. It is facing the North Atlantic Ocean in a winter fury. When a storm hits a carrier group, logic suggests the captain should slow down, turn into the wind, ride it out safely. That is what cruise ships do. That is what cargo ships do. But the U.S. Navy does not have that luxury. In a combat scenario or a vital deployment timeline, the order from the Pentagon is simple: maintain speed and course. And that is when physics takes over. What you are about to see isn't just bad weather. It is a collision between an irresistible force and an immovable object. And sitting on the roof of that object are billions of dollars of high-tech machinery that are one slippery chain away from vanishing into the abyss. Today, we are going inside the brutal reality of aircraft carrier operations in a Sea State 7 storm. We will calculate the cost of a single mistake, look at the engineering that keeps the hull from snapping in half, and answer the ultimate question: can money and technology truly defeat the violence of nature? And to understand the danger, you first have to understand the momentum. A Nimitz or Ford-class carrier is not a boat. It is a floating city moving at 35 miles per hour. When a structure this massive hits a 50-foot wave at full speed, it doesn't just cut through the water, it impacts it. The energy transfer is comparable to a high-speed freight train slamming into a concrete wall. Stand on the bridge during a storm and you don't feel a gentle rocking motion. You feel a shudder that vibrates through your boots and rattles your teeth. That is the steel frame of the ship actually flexing. We will get to the nuclear reactors in the bowels of the ship later, but first, we have to look at the most expensive real estate on the planet: the flight deck. This is 4.5 acres of sovereign American territory, and during a storm, it becomes the deadliest workplace on Earth. Let's talk numbers. Parked on this deck are F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters. Each one of these jets costs roughly $110 million. With upgrades and support equipment, a single squadron on deck represents over $2 billion of taxpayer money. In calm seas, they are secured with heavy-duty steel chains. But in a storm, with the deck pitching 30 feet up and down, those chains are under immense tension. If a rogue wave crashes over the bow, what sailors call green water, it hits the aircraft with the force of a hydraulic press. If a chain snaps, that $100 million jet doesn't just slide, it becomes an 18-ton wrecking ball. It will crush anything in its path: fuel lines, munitions, sailors, before sliding off the edge and sinking 2 miles to the bottom of the ocean. That is $2 billion gone in 10 seconds. And there is no insurance policy for that. But the real insanity begins when flight operations continue despite the weather. You might ask, why fly in a storm? Because enemies don't wait for sunny days. To project power, the Navy must prove it can launch and recover jets when no one else can. This brings us to the most terrifying math problem in aviation. Imagine you are a pilot returning from a 4-hour mission. You are exhausted. Your fuel is low. It is pitch black, raining sideways, and the wind is gusting at 60 knots. You look down and you don't see a runway. You see a tiny bioluminescent postage stamp that is moving away from you at 30 miles per hour while simultaneously heaving up and down the height of a 3-story building. The tolerance for error here is effectively zero. The landing area is less than 500 feet long. If you touch down too far forward, you miss the arresting wires. If you touch down too far back, you strike the round down, the back of the ship, and explode in a fireball that will engulf the entire stern. The helmet you are wearing costs $400,000. It projects data directly into your retinas. But all that technology cannot change the fact that the deck is rising to meet you. This is where the landing signal officers, or LSOs, earn their pay. These are fellow pilots standing on a platform next to the runway, fully exposed to the freezing rain and jet blast. They hold a pickle switch to scream wave off if the approach looks bad. In a storm, the LSO isn't just watching the plane, they are predicting the ocean. They have to judge the cycle of the waves. They know that if the ship is in a trough, the bottom of a wave, the stern will rise dramatically in the next 5 seconds. If the pilot comes in for a normal landing while the deck is rising, the combined closure rate snaps the landing gear like a twig. The jet slams into the steel, the fuel tanks rupture, and the tax money burns. There is a famous incident from 2003 involving the USS Carl Vinson. They were transiting the Pacific when they hit a rogue wave estimated at 75 feet. To give you a sense of scale, that is higher than the flight deck itself. The wall of water smashed over the bow, burying the front of the ship. For a few terrifying seconds, the front of the aircraft carrier was effectively underwater. The impact was so severe it bent the steel plates on the catwalks. But the scarier part is what happens to the human crew inside. While the pilots are the rock stars, the logistical miracle happens below decks, in the mess decks and galleys. Feeding 5,000 people is hard enough. Feeding them when the kitchen is tilting 20 degrees to the port side is a nightmare. This is the side of the military you rarely see in recruitment commercials. The culinary specialists are cooking inside a giant steel box that is being tossed around like a toy. Industrial deep fryers are locked down, but hot oil is a liquid. Boiling soup is a liquid. In a severe roll, the kitchen becomes a hazard zone. A 50-gallon pot of boiling water can become a lethal projectile. And yet the logistics cannot stop. The crew consumes nearly 20,000 meals a day. If the kitchen shuts down because of the weather, morale collapses. So the cooks learn to walk at a 45-degree angle. They wedge themselves between counters. They bake bread while the ovens are vertical. But the discomfort of the crew is nothing compared to the stress on the ship's skeleton. Let's go deeper. Past the hangar bay, past the sleeping quarters, down to the waterline. This is where the true battle against physics is fought. An aircraft carrier is not a solid block of metal. If it were rigid, it would snap in half under the force of the waves. It is designed to be flexible. It has expansion joints that allow the ship to twist and bend. During a heavy storm, if you stand in the long corridors of the ship, you can actually see the hallway bending. You can see the ceiling panels moving. It looks like the ship is breathing. But this flexibility creates a massive problem for the most critical component on board, the nuclear reactors. Deep in the belly of the ship, protected by layers of armored steel, are two A-1B nuclear reactors. These are the beating hearts of the ship. They provide enough electricity to power a city of 100,000 people for 20 years without refueling. They generate the steam that launches the jets and spins the 4 massive propellers. But nuclear reactors rely on precision. They involve control rods, high-pressure coolant loops, and steam piping that is under immense pressure. When the ship slams into a 60-foot wave, the G-forces are transmitted through the hull. The piping vibrates. The reactor vessel shakes. The engineers monitoring these systems, mostly young men and women in their 20s, are watching for leaks. A steam leak in a reactor plant isn't like a leak in your basement. This is invisible, superheated steam that cuts through flesh like a laser. In a storm, the risk of a mechanical failure skyrockets. If the reactor scrams, automatically shuts down for safety due to the violent motion, the ship loses propulsion, and a 100,000-ton carrier with no engines in a hurricane is no longer a warship. It is a victim. Without power, it cannot steer into the waves. It will turn broadside, exposing its weakest flank to the full force of the ocean. That is the scenario that keeps admirals awake at night. And it has happened. In past decades, destroyers accompanying carriers have capsized and sunk because they lost power or steering in typhoons. The sheer power of the ocean tore them apart. The carrier is bigger, yes, but it is not invincible. To mitigate this, the bridge crew engages in a high-stakes game of wave riding. The officer of the deck has to actively drive the ship through the chaos. You cannot just set the autopilot. The helmsman, often a 19-year-old sailor, is physically fighting the wheel. The goal is to keep the bow pointed at the waves at a 45-degree angle. Hit it straight on and you bury the bow, risking structural damage and washing planes overboard. Take it on the side and you risk a roll that could tip the ship beyond its recovery point. It is a delicate, terrifying dance performed with a $13 billion partner. And remember, all of this is happening while the ship is trying to maintain condition III readiness. Weapons are being moved. In the magazines deep below the waterline, sailors are moving 2,000-pound bombs using forklifts. Imagine trying to drive a forklift carrying a bomb worth $40,000 while the floor is tilting like a seesaw. The friction of the tires against the non-skid floor is the only thing keeping that explosive from sliding into a bulkhead. The danger isn't just the bomb exploding, modern fuses prevent that. The danger is the bomb crushing a sailor's legs against the wall. This is the hidden cost of naval supremacy. We look at the glossy photos of the carrier cutting through the waves and we see power. But inside, it is a chaotic, loud, and violent struggle for survival. But what happens when the storm gets so bad that even the carrier has to run? There is a point where the price of operations becomes too high, when the waves exceed 60 feet, when the wind rips the antennas off the mast, when the green water starts smashing the windows of the bridge, which are located nearly 100 feet above the water line. Yes, waves can reach that high. When the bow plunges down into a trough and a massive swell rises up, water can impact the flight deck control tower, the island. In 1944, Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet was caught in Typhoon Cobra. They didn't have the satellite weather data we have today. They drove straight into the eye of the storm. 3 destroyers vanished. Over 700 men died. Planes were ripped off the decks of the carriers like leaves. It was the U.S. Navy's worst defeat of the war that didn't involve combat. That lesson is written in blood in every naval manual today. But modern technology has given commanders a false sense of security. We believe that with radar, satellites, and nuclear power, we can beat the weather. We believe that $13 billion buys immunity from nature. Well, it does not. Consider the cost of maintenance after one of these storms. When the ship finally returns to port, the damage assessment begins. Antennas are snapped. The non-skid coating on the flight deck, which costs millions to reapply, is stripped away by the salt spray. The hull plates show signs of metal fatigue. A single week in a severe storm can age a ship by 5 years. It puts stress on every weld and every rivet. The maintenance bill for the U.S. Navy is already astronomical, and every time a carrier group punches through a storm instead of going around it, the taxpayer gets the invoice for the repairs. But is it worth it? To answer that, you have to look at the strategic map. The oceans are the highways of global trade and military dominance. If a U.S. carrier group cannot operate in the North Atlantic in winter, then for 3 months of the year, that ocean belongs to someone else. It belongs to the Russian submarines that are designed for these waters. It belongs to the adversary. So the U.S. Navy pays the price. They pay in steel, in money, and sometimes in blood. The most intense moments, however, are not always on the bridge or the flight deck. Sometimes the most terrifying place to be is in the berthing compartments, the sleeping quarters. Imagine trying to sleep in a triple-stack bunk, coffin-sized, while the world turns upside down. You are strapped in. The sound of the ocean outside the hull is deafening, like a sledgehammer hitting the steel. You can hear the groaning of the metal frames. You know that on the other side of that half-inch steel plate is millions of tons of freezing black water trying to crush the hull. And you know that if something goes wrong, if the reactor fails, if the hull breaches, you are decks below the waterline. You are in a steel maze in the dark. This psychological pressure is the true hidden cost of the American military machine. We focus on the $13 billion spent on steel, stealth coating, and reactors, but the real currency here is human endurance. Every time a carrier group sails into a storm, the Navy is rolling the dice. They are betting a floating city against the chaotic, unmerciful physics of the North Atlantic. Most of the time, engineering wins, but as history has shown us, the ocean, always has the advantage. The United States Navy remains the only force on Earth capable of projecting this kind of power in these kinds of conditions. But it is a capability that hangs by a thread, a single snapped chain, a single missed landing, or a single crack in the hull. It is a monument to human engineering, but also a humble reminder that no matter how many trillions of dollars you print, you can never truly conquer the sea. You can only hope to survive it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the brutal logistics of naval warfare, make sure to hit that like button. It is the best way to support the channel and helps us fund more documentaries like this. And I want to ask you a question in the comments, knowing the risks, the noise, and the danger of being washed overboard. For a salary of $30,000 a year, would you step onto that flight deck during a storm? Type yes or no down below. If you think the surface is terrifying, you have no idea what is happening below the waves. Click the video on your screen right now to see the claustrophobic reality of life inside a nuclear submarine. You won't believe how they live. Thanks for watching.